Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. We love because he first loved us. That is 1 John 4, verses 18 through 19. I am your host, Sandra Flach. Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast. We exist to encourage and equip you for your unique parenting journey. I'm on this journey with you. I am a mom of 8. Don't be too impressed because we only have 2 still at home, but 5 came through adoption. And the 2 that are still home are young adult sons who were both diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome when they were little. And so therefore, I know the struggles that come with raising children with trauma histories, as well as prenatal exposure to alcohol and other substances. So my goal for this podcast, my hope is that you will find it an invaluable resource for your journey. And if you do, drop me a line, email me. My email is in the show notes. Follow, subscribe, leave a review, do all the things, because that actually helps this podcast to be found more easily by other foster and adoptive parents who need it as well. So we want to be that resource, and we have a lot of resources for your parenting journey, including my soon-to-be released devotional book. The title, so far as I know it, is Soul Care Saturday, 52 Devotions for Foster and Adoptive Moms. Hoping that it will release in November for National Adoption Month. So stay tuned to all of our socials in this podcast and every place for current updates on that. I am excited to let you know that our Justice for Orphans website is now all updated. So yes, you still have to go to justicefororphansny.org, but when you do, you will see a nice big round circle that says the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. And if you click there, it will take you to not only this podcast, but all of our FASD resources, as well as my blog, all existing like in one spot. So super easy to find everything. Kathy did a phenomenal job on the website, so I hope that you will check it out, as well as like our new socials. We have separate socials for the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. We're on Instagram at AFC_journey, and we're on Facebook as the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. So I would love to connect with you there. So please like and follow us there. I would also love to connect with you in person. Just a reminder that right around the corner, I will be in Ohio leading an FASD workshop with the Hope Bridge folks in Hartville. Registration is on the Hope Bridge website. So you'll have to go there in order to register. And I will be speaking on FASD on Saturday, September 6th. I will also be in October at the Christian Alliance for Orphans Summit in Houston, October 1st through 3rd. I will be leading a Better Together workshop entitled Hope Beyond Frustration, Incremental Growth Through Simple and Consistent Practices. I'll also be hosting a meetup. There's a time slot and a location at CAFO where all of us, parents and caregivers raising kids with FASD, can meet up and connect. And I'll have an exhibitor table there as well. And then I will be in Chicago for the Replanted Conference on October 23rd through 25th, where I'll also be leading a workshop. That one is called Wired Differently, Understanding FASD, Trauma, and the Brain. And I'll also have an exhibitor booth there. So I hope that you will take the opportunity this fall to get to one of these amazing conferences. And if you do, please stop by and see me. I would love to see you. Now to today's guest. I'm excited to welcome Bryan Post as our guest. He is a best-selling author and one of America's leading voices in child behavior, adoption trauma, and love-based parenting. A former foster child turned internationally recognized therapist, Bryan has spent over 2 decades helping families understand and heal the emotional root of challenging behaviors, especially in children affected by trauma, loss, and disrupted attachment. His groundbreaking work has been featured on NBC, ABC, and USA Today. Bryan is the creator of the Fear to Love method and founder of um, Bondify.ai, the world's first AI powered trauma informed parenting support app. We're going to find out about all of it. So please welcome to the show, Bryan Post. Hi, Bryan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sandra. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you.
Yeah, same here. I'm excited to get to know you and for our listeners to get to know you as well. And I always love to start off with like the backstory for my guests. So I know you spent time in foster care as a child. So would you share that part of your story with us?
Well, I was placed for adoption at birth, and so I went into foster care. I was in a couple of different foster placements before I was adopted into my family, and that's where I was at. And then my sister, I had a sister growing up. We weren't biological. She was also adopted, so she came after me. She was a year younger than I was.
Wow. And so what was that experience like for you growing up, knowing you were adopted? Um, you know, with the, I know there's this, some folks believe that if a baby is adopted at birth, there's no problems whatsoever. Everything's going to be wonderful. That's not necessarily the case, we know.
Yeah.
So what was your experience?
Well, you're absolutely right. That's not the case because research now tells us that as early as the fourth week after conception, the fetus is capable of hearing. And by the second trimester, the fetus is already developing psychological processing. Nadine Burke Harris says in the first year of life, the human brain's developing 1 million neural connections per second. So there's so much brain development that's happening in those early stages. And it just it has so much of an impact. And it's unfortunate that we don't really spend more time talking about that in utero experience, which has such implications. You know, John, I'm in London right now, and the home of John Bowlby, and John Bowlby used to say that he said the first 3 years of life establish our blueprints for all of our future social emotional relationships. But now we know that that's from conception to five. By the time your brain is 5 years old, you know, it's 95 to 97% developed. So that all has very much an impact. And I was fortunate. I grew up knowing that I was adopted from the very earliest, as far back as I can remember. I just always knew. And it's funny because my mom always said that they found me under a rock on a hillside. And it was kind of a joke, but it was just kind of something that stuck with me. And so I never questioned it, never had any longings or for a bio family or anything like that. But my sister, on the other hand, had a completely different experience. And I heard a little clip of Gabor Mady talking the other day, and he was saying that no two kids ever grow up in the same home. And it's 100% the case. And for myself and my sister, and my story wouldn't exist without my sister's story. My sister was like the contrast to my experience. So my in utero experience, my biological mother, I met her when she was 37, when I was 37 years old. First thing she said to me is I loved being pregnant. She said I ate the right foods, I exercised, I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, and I just did everything that I was supposed to do. And I knew that innately as a psychotherapist. I had a deep intuitive sense that I had had a really good in utero experience. My sister, on the other hand, she was 3 months premature. She weighed 3.5 pounds. Her mother had used alcohol, potentially drugs, and she spent the first 3 months of her life in an incubator. And my mom said, when we got you, you were smiling. When we got your sister, she was crying. And I believe that those were definitive moments in our, we talk about critical periods in the brain. I believe that there are critical periods in relationship, which when you miss those critical periods, it's really hard to recover them. And I believe that my parents with my sister got completely on the wrong track from the very beginning, and it followed my sister throughout her life. And, and my sister, the reason I said that is because my sister always talked about her biological family, always talked about her biological mother, wanting to find her biological mother. And I never had that same longing. And I believe that for my sister, she never felt secure and connected with my mother and my father because of all the dynamics that played out. And that's what I do and have been doing for the last 25 years. I work and specialize with adopted children, but I always work with families. I don't work with kids by themselves. I work with families, and I always start with the parents. So we can go as far into that as you want to go.
Yeah, because I was actually going to ask, I was pretty confident because I know you have a background in psychology and social work. So I was going to ask what led you to go in that direction.
It was 100% the growing up in my family environment. I pretty much, even though my parents loved us, they were as consistent as the day, they were as predictable as the rain, but they did not understand trauma and they did not understand their own trauma. So when you mix, both my parents were children of alcoholics. My dad had severe post-traumatic stress disorder from Vietnam. When you mix that with a child who was my sister, who was emotionally stunted, developmentally and emotionally delayed, that parentification of children from alcoholics. My mother was the oldest daughter of 10. My father was the oldest son of 9. So they were super responsible, which was a saving grace for us on so many levels. But for my sister, because of her developmental delays and challenges, which they did not understand or no one else understood, because like you said, they got her from birth, so everything's supposed to be okay. Even though she had been exposed to alcohol, even though she was 3 months premature, even though she weighed 3.5 pounds, even though she spent 3 months in an incubator, everything was supposed to be okay because she was a baby, but everything was not okay. And it was the perfect mix. People ask me all the time, how'd you get into this work? I believe God sent me into this world for this specific work. I believe everything that I've gone through in life has wired me specifically to understand adopted children and adopted family dynamics in a completely different way. And I needed my sister and I needed that conflict to create an environment. It was like a laboratory. If I go back, it was like a laboratory for what adopted families and children go through. But I grew up in World War III. My parents were old school. They got stressed. When we had behavior problems, they hit, they yelled. And unfortunately, stress and fear causes you to do more of the thing that's not working. So there was more yelling, there was more hitting, there was more whipping, there was more taking away, there was more threatening, more shaming. And that went for years, for years. So I know without a doubt the motivating factor for me to get into this work was the experience growing up with my sister and the hope that one day I could positively impact parents to understand themselves better so that they could understand their children better and then create more peaceful homes and relationships.
Yeah, I love that. So my next question is a two-parter, and you can answer whichever part first, because I wanted to ask you about the impact of trauma on children in utero and post, because you mentioned it's like that first 1,000 days from conception till even age 5, right? So crucial. But also parents, adoptive and foster kinship caregivers, we need to address our own stuff.
That's
Right,
right.
our own trauma. So, and why? So, why do we as parents need to do that? And why do we need to understand trauma and how it impacts children?
Excellent question. First of all, if you work, Bruce Perry said this, if you work with children, you have to have a generalist understanding of the brain. So that's really important. So then when we tie that to trauma, see, trauma is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, and unpredictable. And when you don't have an opportunity to express, process, and understand, that stressful event can become a long-term, lifelong, potentially brain-altering event. And we know now from research that when the brain, the amygdala specifically, is exposed to prolonged experience of stress, it can damage the other really important parts of the brain. You, as someone who specializes in FAS and FAE, you understand what happens when a stressed brain, what it does to the hippocampus and to the hypothalamus, and how it creates chaos for a child. Well, when we don't understand, when we're parents, and we don't understand the trauma of our children, we don't understand their brains, and we don't understand how stress and trauma impacts all of us, because we've all been impacted by trauma, then it makes it really difficult to navigate the really stressful times. Because the really stressful times are when your brainstem gets activated, and your brainstem stores every memory you've ever had in your life. So when your child is acting out, which is coming from their stress, which is oftentimes coming from their regressed state, that acting out state causes you to become stressed. Now, that stress, what we tend to do in our society is we externalize it and we make it about the child's behavior. So my child's acting out because they're stressed out, which we don't even realize that, but it's stressing me out. So I say I'm being stressed out because of my child's behavior. But the reality is, and this is why a parent's understanding of their own trauma is so important, is that when your child is acting out, it's actually sending a vibration to your brainstem, and you're going down into your brainstem looking for a similar emotional experience. Emotion is energy in motion. So it really has nothing to do with what your child's doing in the moment, even though it seems like it, and that's all based on how your amygdala works, but you're actually going down into your brainstem looking for a similar experience. And as soon as you find it, that's what drives your thinking, your behaving, your feeling. It's that old experience. So if you're not more self-aware of the things that have gone on in your own history and grown in more mindfulness of your own internal experience, you're going to get hijacked every single time your child gets hijacked. And then what happens is then you rely on traditional parenting approaches, and the traditional parenting approaches, which are rooted in stress and fear, actually end up contributing to the problem. So that's why it is so important for parents to be intimately aware of their own trauma, their own triggers, just their own pain. Because I believe that fundamentally the biggest challenges, Sandra, that we experience in our families are rooted from unexpressed grief. I believe that unexpressed grief is the single biggest form of trauma, the most pervasive form of trauma that impacts us throughout society. And there's so many parents who say, well, I didn't have any trauma. I had a great childhood. Well, guess what? We all lived through the pandemic. We all lived through COVID, which means we've all lived through a macro level of trauma. And let me tell you how you know that, because there's not a single person that exists that can be walking around, and if someone coughs or someone sneezes, there's a level of anxiety that was never there before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, a sneeze or a cough didn't even, you just say, excuse you or God bless you. But now when someone sneezes or coughs, there's a level of anxiety. And even if we have 99% certainty that we're not going to get sick, our brain and our emotional experience is still tied to all of that stress that most of the time we haven't had an opportunity to express, process, and understand. So that's just macro. And then that doesn't even get into parents in utero experience. And I just lectured in London, and then I was in Scotland. And one of the things I always like to say to parents is, when was the last time you thought about your birth? When was the last time you asked your parent about what your birth was like? And if you don't remember, because you could be 52 years old, right? So like I am. So you don't remember your birth. Well, then think about, and my father's passed away now. I still have my mother, thank God. But think about, where were your parents during that time? When your mom was pregnant with you, or what was going on with your father, or maybe you were adopted, maybe you're an adult adoptee who's now adopted. What was going on in your first conception to 5 years of life, because that has an impact on who you are as an individual right now. And when you adopt a child who is so stress sensitive and fearful, it is going to trigger all your stress and all your fear. And you're going to, because society is going to support you in blaming that child, that's what's going to happen. And then that's when you get overwhelmed. That's when we spiral. And that's when families really, really struggle.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So much good stuff there. I want to unpack and just some thoughts that come to me because and sometimes I think as parents we might not recognize any of our own stuff initially, right? And that our own baggage may be driving, our parenting style. For example, I'm a little older than you, but I grew up my parents divorced when I was little. And
Mhm.
divorce is so, culturally acceptable, right? These days that we don't even think of that as a trauma on kids when
Mhm.
really it is. And when I was like 5 years old when my parents got divorced and my father moved out of the state and abandoned the family and never really came back. I was an older adult with 8 kids. We have 5 kids through adoption. Before I really started to recognize the impact that that had on me, and then
Yes.
as a girl, as a child, the rejection that I felt, and then how that rejection, not consciously, but it definitely drove a lot of my decisions through my teen years, right?
Mhm.
Then fast forward to where now I'm a mom of all of these kids. And I really struggled parenting my girls because, and I didn't recognize this for a very long time. And this is why we do have to address our stuff. I
Mhm.
didn't recognize that I was parenting my girls out of fear by the time they became teenagers because I feared that they would make some of the bad decisions that I made as a
Mhm.
teenager, so that I parented them really from that place of fear, not a good thing to do. So
Mhm.
it took a lot of time and work for me to recognize that and realize that really all came from my own trauma that I didn't even know was a trauma, but it
Right.
affected my parenting.
100%. And let me tell you something. We don't recognize what trauma is, and this is a complete paradox because we label things. The
Mhm.
moment you say divorce, you have an association, and now what's the divorce rate? 55, 60%. You have an association of divorce, and you don't have any concept because of the label. You don't have any concept of the seconds, the minutes, the hours, the days, the weeks, the months, the years of stress that goes into that experience. It is no different than when we say physical abuse or sexual abuse or maltreatment or neglect. As soon as we give it a label, everything goes in this little box, and it really arrests our ability to understand at a deeper level, at so many levels, especially with children, but definitely with ourselves. And your experience, unfortunately, fortunately, you were able to grow into the awareness and the insights. But there are so many mental health professionals, Sandra, who don't have a clue about their own trauma. And if they don't have, if they, even if they do have a clue about their own trauma, they've been trained that they've got to separate the personal from the professional. So they say, well, I've got all my stuff worked out, and here I go into the therapy sessions completely emotionally unavailable for my clients, or completely emotionally overwhelmed by my clients, and suppressing their emotions in ways that I'm not even really consciously aware of because I haven't dealt with my own stuff. If mental health professionals haven't dealt with their own stuff, what is the likelihood that just your average parent is going to deal with theirs? It's so unlikely. And that in my opinion, along with mental health, along with social services, along with juvenile probation, is the reason why these systems are broken. We keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And Einstein said that's the definition of insanity. Well, insanity comes from a constant, overwhelming experience of stress and fear.
Such good stuff. Well, I know you are doing great work. And I wanted to kind of dive into some of your work, several initiatives, the Post Institute, the Leaf Company, and Fear to Love. So unpack those for us. What came first? Where did you begin?
So the origin is the Post Institute, and we formed that. Christy Saul and myself, we formed that almost 25 years ago, but it's now Fear to Love. So we changed the name. So Post Institute is
Okay.
now Fear to Love, and that's based on my best-selling adoption, foster care, parenting book called From Fear to Love: Parenting, Challenging, Adopting Foster Children. So we've sold almost 1 million copies of that book. And the biggest part of that portion of my career was lecturing, writing, and producing educational materials, and traveling around the world and working with families in their homes. So I would go and I'd spend 3 days with a family, a high risk family, and we would really just work to unpack all of the challenges that they were having. And it would be really intense and really emotional. And I did that for a number of years. And then I started the Leaf Company, which is a wraparound program in Northern California. Everything I've done is been very much grassroots. So it's always, I just have this knowing that real healing happens in the home. It happens in the living room. So the Leaf Company is a wraparound program, and we go into the homes. So now I have a team, an awesome team of trained professionals that go into homes to support high risk, at risk adopted families to help maintain the placements. So we've done that. And then I created Bondify. Bondify.ai is an adoption focused parent support app, which is like me in a parent's home. I was just in Scotland, and the mom said, "Can you come home with me?" I've heard parents say that for so long, and now I can say, "Yes, I can." It's in the form of an app. It's right on your phone, and you can ask it questions, and parents think that they're talking to me. It is that effective because it's all programmed with my knowledge and my experience of working with families for so many years.
That is incredible. The AI can be used for such great things, right?
It can, absolutely.
I love that. So I know that, foundationally is your love-based
Mhm.
approach to parenting. So would you
Yes.
unpack that for us?
Yes. So 20 something years ago, I came up with a theoretical model called the stress model. And what happened one day is I was in a lecture, and a mom came up and was talking to me. And as she was telling me, as you know, as a speaker, parents come up and they share their story. As she was sharing the story leading up to this child's behavior, all of a sudden I realized that I wasn't focused on the behaviors. I was listening to the story. And as I was listening to the story, what I realized is that I was listening to the stress and the fear that was driving the behavior. And there was just this one moment when I said, "Here's what I want you to do." And all of my instruction was about reducing the stress and reducing the fear. It had nothing to do with the behavior. So I formulated the stress model after a lot of research and a lot of working with families and kids. That the stress model says all behavior, it's very simple, all behavior arises from a state of stress. In between the behavior and the stress is the presence of a primary emotion. There are two primary emotions, love and fear. Your body, your brain, your body mind system knows, your cellular system knows a thriving state, an open state, and it knows a surviving state, a closed state. So as soon as you become stressed, you constrict into survival. That is the essence of fear. Emotion is energy in motion. So an acting out child is a stressed out child. So all behavior arises from a state of stress. In between the behavior and stress is the presence of a primary emotion, love or fear. We have to be able to express, process, and understand the fear so we can calm the stress and diminish the behavior. So over 23 years now, the only thing I've done with families is help parents understand their own stress reactions, because the first thing they have to realize is that when your child is behaving, which is driven by stress, that behavior causes you to be stressed. That stress leads to your fear, that fear leads to your behavior. So the first thing I've got to get parents to do, and believe it or not, I'm going to tell you the most simple thing, which is also the most challenging thing, is when a child is misbehaving, the first thing I've got to get a parent to be able to do is stop and breathe. I've got to get the parent to stop and breathe. Joseph Ledoux, a New York University neuroscientist, and please interrupt me at any time because I can just go on and on.
I'm soaking it up. I'm taking it all in. Keep going.
Joseph Ledoux, a New York University neuroscientist, he wrote a book called The Emotional Brain. And in that book, he says, in times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. So when you become stressed, and Herbert Benson, a Harvard physiologist in the 1970s, discovered something called, which he called the relaxation response. I call it, I don't believe that I believe at the level of the amygdala, because he says when you become stressed, the first thing that happens is you stop breathing and you start taking very short, ineffective breaths. So that's actually a reaction. So when our amygdala fires off, that's a reaction, that's not a response. And so then what happens is we become stressed because of our child's behavior. Our thinking becomes confused and distorted. Our short-term memory is suppressed. Obviously, because of their behavior and their stress, they're not thinking clearly and they're not remembering. And then you get caught in a negative feedback loop. And that becomes a conditioned experience which reworks the brain. Now, the first key to disrupting that cycle is getting parents to stop and breathe. Very simply, Bruce Lee said the greatest lesson you can learn in life is to master the ability to remain calm. Yeah. He was saying so much in that, because if I can get you to stop and breathe in the midst of stress, then I'm getting you to calm your own stress. So what you're actually doing hormonally is when you stop and breathe is you start turning on oxytocin. Oxytocin is your brain's anti-stress hormone. It's also a learned experience in the brain. Whereas the amygdala and the stress reaction is automatic, oxytocin has to be learned. So when you stop in the midst of stress and you start breathing, you start turning on oxytocin. When you do that, all of a sudden your thinking comes back online and your short-term memory is available. Now, what you've got to be able to do in that moment, you take those 3 to 10 deep breaths and you say, I'm not going to die. I had all of Scotland talking about I'm not going to die and everything's going to be all right. Because when we get stressed and scared, we start catastrophizing. When you start catastrophizing, then everything looks 10 times worse than what it really is. But in that moment, Sandra, no one's going to die, no matter what your amygdala is telling you, because that's what your amygdala is telling you. And so my whole mission and motivation in passion and purpose is to get parents to stop and breathe, realize that no one's going to die, slow down, soften, connect to your understanding of who you know your child is, connect to the memory of who you know your child is, and realize in that moment they're stressed and scared. And when you can do that, something really magical starts to happen. A regulation process starts to unfold. A co-regulation process starts to unfold. Bruce Perry says the brain always returns to the way the event was handled the last time. So in the midst of the problem behavior, when you're able to get regulated and respond instead of react, then you're actually creating a new memory in your child's brain. Now you can build on that, but you have to realize that you're interrupting a conditioned reaction pattern between you and your child. If you can't stop and breathe, if the parent cannot stop and breathe first, how on earth can we expect our children to calm down? Because families are about co-regulation. Family attachment is about dyadic regulation. It is not a solely focused individual experience, but parents lead the way. And the biggest disservice we do is by not empowering our parents to have deeper self-understanding and to learn how to become more mindful and to breathe and to calm down and to realize that no one's going to die.
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond, invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets Neurobehavioral Model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community.
So many things I'm thinking, Bryan. I love the fact that like the breathe part. I learned because my youngest son, who's now 19, we adopted him at age 5, lots of trauma, fetal alcohol syndrome. And I had to learn that if I was dysregulated, he would pick up on that and he would get even more dysregulated. And catastrophize is his middle name. Okay. So I've had to learn that because things would not go good if mama wasn't regulated, right? I had to learn to do that. And the breathing thing is so, so important. I love that. That's, go ahead.
Let me share something with you. Alan Shore, as a neuroscientist at UCLA, I think he's still at UCLA, but he wrote 3 tomes. I mean, they are so big on affect regulation. The first one is Affect Regulation and the Origin of the Self. In the introduction of this book, which tells you how amazing the whole book is, but it's so big, he cites Taylor et al. 1997 as saying, affect dysregulation is a fundamental mechanism involved in all psychiatric disorders. When I read that 20 years ago, it was like God turned on a light bulb in my brain. Because if affect dysregulation, being stressed out, is a fundamental cause of all psychiatric disorders, if that is true, then what does that tell us we've got to do? The first thing we've got to do is we've got to start reducing the stress. And 9 times out of 10, when it comes to our children's problem behaviors, what we do is increase the stress.
Yeah.
And that's why children don't grow better. They grow older.
Yeah. So what are some ways that we can decrease the stress? Because I know, you guide families from a place of chaos to a place of connection, but what are some of those things that we can do? I know you clearly breathe, get ourselves self-regulated. What else can we do?
So that's actually the most important one, because everything in my mind starts there. But I'll give you a perfect example. I was just in Amsterdam with a family that's been following me for quite a while. And they've got a son now. He's 16 years old, and he's stress sensitive and fearful and gets easily overwhelmed. And I noticed one thing that the mom was doing, and I was so happy to see it. Number one, they were attuned. But you can only be attuned if you're really lowering your own stress, so you can really dial in to where your child is at. So attunement is the dance between the parent and the child. It's really being connected. So she's very attuned. So she's paying attention. The other thing she was doing is she was always making eye contact with him. She was always making eye contact. The other thing she was doing is she was giving him affection. And the other thing is, as soon as he would start to elevate, she wasn't being punitive or threatening. She would just look at him and she would say, I see you. We're here. Everything's going to be okay. And she said that without saying a word. So those are like core things, because in my world, Sandra, I want to prevent escalation. I don't want to intervene. If you're intervening, you're too late. Your brain's already in that old pathway. Now, sometimes you got to intervene because you missed the prevention. But if you can, and what's that saying? An ounce of prevention is worth, I don't know.
A pound of cure, yeah.
Yeah, a pound of cure. That's I think that's Benjamin Franklin. But it's true. If you can prevent, you never get to those escalated states. But it starts with you. You've got to be able to be regulated. And then you pay attention. Here's the thing. Severe behavior is predictable. Parents always say, my child just has outbursts, becomes aggressive, he just out of nowhere, he just exploded. It's just not true. Because not only is severe behavior predictable, but children do the same thing over and over and over again. But when your amygdala is looking for a threat, that's all it's doing. It's just looking for the threat. So it doesn't see the buildup. So I teach a principle called the A to Z principle, which says Z is the outcome and is the behavior. So when a child has a behavioral outburst or whatever the problem is, we look at Z. And in our society, because of stress and fear, the furthest we look is X and Y. So that's the outcome and that's the behavior. But the alphabet starts with A. If you really want to get to changing the outcome, you got to look at A, which is where the process starts. A, B, C, D, E, F, G is the process that leads all the way up to the outcome. And when parents can get empowered and equipped and really slow down, and this is where the breathing thing comes into place, you can take a behavior. Any parent right now can take any behavior problem that their child is having. They can wait for it to happen. And then also, after it's happened, go back and ask yourself, what were the things that led to that behavior? Where did I miss the cues? So that's the A to Z principle. And so that empowers parents with 23 to 25 different interventions that they can have along the way to completely change the outcome. The other thing that I like to teach are the 3 pathways of emotional expression, because a lot of times we can completely change how we get into our patterns with our children by realizing that we have these 3 pathways for emotional expression. And the reason we have them is that it's how we transition energy, because we're all just energy. We have attitudes, we have feelings, and we have behaviors. As children growing up, we could not roll our eyes to our parents. So then what would happen is that pathway would get suppressed. So then that pathway leads to feelings. As children, we could not have feelings with our parents. So then that pathway gets suppressed. So if you can't have attitudes, you can't have feelings, then you drop down to behaviors. As children, our parents didn't want behavior. So then that pathway would get suppressed. Well, if you can't express attitudes, feelings, and behaviors, you only have 2 other options, 2 other outlets, and that's anger and depression. And anger and depression have to come through behaviors. So here's what I teach parents. Your child having an attitude, being disrespectful, that's a myth. That's something that's been passed down through the generations. It's actually not true. An attitude is a pathway of expression. Your child is having an attitude in order to transition the energy that they are experiencing based on the request that you've made to do something they probably don't want to do, so that they can transition. So they roll their eyes to transition the energy to do the thing you've asked them to do. So I tell parents, you can eliminate 70% of the challenges that you have in day-to-day parenting just by ignoring the attitudes. That's so hard, because we have generations of negative programming that says if your child rolls their eyes or huffs and puffs, that is the end of the world. Someone's going to die. They're never going to be able to get a job. They're going to get shot by a police officer. It's just like we catastrophize. So then we don't allow attitudes. If you want to eliminate 70% of problems, stop focusing on the attitudes. Your child is just transitioning energy. Now, that's very hard to do. It's hard to do because we've got generations of negative conditioning that tells us it's not okay. That's the only reason it's hard to do. So once you drop down to feelings, now this is how you eliminate 90% of the problems that you're dealing with. Support the feelings. Encourage the feelings. Want the feelings. The feeling is the pathway to the healing. See, we don't realize that the reason we have behavior problems is because we have trauma. We have the trauma that has the emotions attached to it, the energy attached to it that's never been expressed. That's where the unexpressed grief comes from. Behaviors are rooted in unexpressed emotional experiences. A child cannot get through the behavior if the emotion underneath it continues to be suppressed. So if you really want your child to heal, you got to get okay with feelings. And not only get okay with feelings, but when you realize the feelings are the path to the healing, all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, instead of suppressing their feelings and telling them, don't talk to me like that, and you can't use that tone of voice, and all this stuff that's passed down from generations, which is passed down, Sandra, it comes from trauma. All these common parenting techniques, those are all rooted in generational trauma, and we just haven't really thought about it. I'm going to write an article about this sometime, maybe even a whole book, because your timeouts, your points and your rewards, your behavior modification, your consequences, all those things are rooted in generational trauma. Generational trauma. We got to visit the Anne Frank museum and the Anne Frank house when we were in Amsterdam. You think of it, and then to see the Holocaust, the National Holocaust Names Museum, where all those names of those people, you think about all that trauma and all that fear, all that has gotten passed down into these little parenting techniques that actually make our relationships with our children more difficult. And so what I say to parents is encourage the feelings. Instead of telling your 15-year-old son, don't yell at me, don't curse me, instead of saying that, just try it. Just try saying, give it to me. You're mad. Let it out. I want to hear it. I need to hear what you have to tell me. The first thing he's going to do is going to shut him right down, because he's not going to be used to that. He's going to be like, what? But see, the other thing is, all of a sudden, we start creating relationships where our children feel heard. And when your child knows that they feel heard, they don't have to do all the yelling. They don't have to do all the cursing. But if you don't, then they drop into behaviors. And here's the thing, last point. How do we, in our society, as adults, how do we navigate when people say things that we don't like or do things that we don't like? I was just in a cab and he was murmuring about the traffic and the drivers the entire drive. You know what that's called? That's called attitudes and feelings. That's what we do in society as adults. We have attitudes and feelings when people do things or say things that we don't like or that we don't approve of. And the reason we have attitudes and feelings is because that's how we transition the energy. Otherwise, like Stephen Covey says, upset feelings are buried alive. They never die, and they come back as something uglier. We just get stuck with them. So we have attitudes and feelings, but when it comes to our children, we don't want them to have attitudes and feelings. So it's such a paradox when it comes to our child rearing practices.
Yeah, it makes me think of, I don't like swearing. I don't like hearing my kids swear. However, my youngest son, like I mentioned, I have picked up on the pattern of when he is experiencing stress, then his conversations are peppered with swearing. Now, I used to take the approach of like trying to correct the swearing, right? We don't talk like that in this house. We don't, sometimes I fall into that and still want to say something. However, I've picked up on the pattern of if he's extremely stressed, that's one way that he's expressing that stress.
That's right.
Just trying to discipline or correct that, right? Consequence it makes it worse.
And let me tell you something, to go all the way back to where we started. How do you not know that those are not imprints from his in utero experience, from a mother that was under stress, maybe in conflictual situations, maybe in domestic violence? I've seen that so many times. I've seen small children cursing and parents like, where does he get this language from? And I just say, what was his in utero experience like? And they're like, oh, there's a bunch of domestic violence. Well, it's already patterned in his brain. So what it tells you is when he's really stressed, he's at the base of his brainstem, because an acting out child is a stressed out child, is a regressed child. That's the other thing we have to see. We have to see your acting out child who's 15 is not 15. When he's acting out and he's stressed out, he's regressed. He's back in earlier experiences. It has nothing to do with you, even though we take it personally. And the reason we take it personally is because we get stressed. It has nothing to do with you. He's repatterning, re-experiencing something that he could have potentially went through in a nonverbal, in a prenatal phase that we never know. But the moment you start consequencing him, the moment you start shutting him down, not only are you losing the opportunity for relationship, you're losing the opportunity for him to heal through whatever pain that he's had. And when you have the relationship, you can eventually say, hey, choose a better word. Even when
Mhm.
you're mad, I know how mad you get, but please, those words hurt my ears. Please try to choose a better word or just be louder or let's just figure something else out. And the relationship creates the opportunity for the child to learn and do things differently.
Mm, so good. And speaking of, prenatal things, like I mentioned, two of my kids diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome. I probably have a couple others that could have been, but they're much older now, and we didn't know what we didn't know back then. And even currently, 1 in 20 school-age children in the United States has been prenatally exposed. Higher
Hmm.
number among the kids in adoption and foster care. Most are not diagnosed. So what has been your experience with FASD?
Well, I tell you what, I'm a simpleton, Sandra. I look at all trauma as causing stress sensitivity and heightened levels of fear. And so when I've worked with children, I had a group home in Canada, and that was the biggest label was FAS because there was a lot of alcoholism.
Yes.
Anytime you work with those children, obviously you know that the hippocampal structures of the brain have been damaged, sometimes permanently, because of the alcohol. So their memory is not going to be as readily available as other children. But the key always for me becomes you've got to create a regulated environment. You've got to create a regulated relationship, because if you don't create regulation and you don't create oxytocin rich opportunities, the brain is never going to have an opportunity to heal. So you take a child who's diagnosed FAS, FAE, you have got to realize that they are stress sensitive children.
Yes.
When you understand that they are stress sensitive, then everything in their world becomes having to navigate lowering the stress. And when they get elevated and escalated, you got to realize, because that sensitivity has kicked up, the first thing we've got to do is we've got to regulate ourselves so we can help regulate them. Because it goes back to Joseph Ledoux. In times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted, and our short term memory is suppressed. In times of stress, it's like we all were FAS exposed because we can't remember, we can't think clearly. So, what do you got to do? You have to regulate the system, and that starts with us as the adults.
Yeah, and I have found I've never thought about the brain so much as I have in these years parenting my kids and an understanding, especially not only understanding the trauma, but as we had to become, really understanding FASD by the time our kids became teenagers. And it, because we had the connection, we had great attachment, things were going pretty well, but then they become teenagers and there's like,
Yeah.
why is the dumpster on fire now? But um, or at least more so than usual.
Yeah.
And definitely regulation has been key, and just understanding the brain, right? And understanding, for example, one of the primary symptoms of FASD would be, say, slow processing pace. So my boys tend to process verbal information. So if you're speaking to them, they're not going to catch maybe every single word, especially if there's a lot of words or if it's being spoken to them quickly. So we have learned to slow down, give them
Mhm.
extra time to answer us, and use less words, one step directions, right? Let's just
Mhm.
instead of
Mhm.
throwing a bunch of stuff at them, one step directions. And that's been huge. But we know to do that because we understand their brain, the impact of the prenatal exposure to alcohol on their brain. So we do a lot with accommodations. We kind of follow a neurobehavioral model, and
Mhm.
I kind of feel like it's very similar to what you do,
Sure.
and what you're teaching.
And you wouldn't be able to do any of those things if you weren't regulated.
Right.
If you weren't regulated, you couldn't slow down. Your
Right.
frustration would be too high. Your vibration would be too intense. And their brains are so sensitive, they would pick up on it and it would overwhelm them even more. So by creating the relationship, and see, I think parents a lot of times they're so focused on treating the FASD that they forget about the relationship, and that the relationship is the single greatest tool. It is the single greatest tool. You can navigate anything through relationship, and you can learn how to do those things that you're talking about, which all become valuable. But really, Sandra, those things are valuable for all children. They're
Yeah.
really valuable
Oh,
for all children, right?
Yeah. So, Bryan, what is your website so our listeners can learn more about what you do?
So feartolove.com, bryanpost.com, which is Bryan with a Y, and bondify.ai. And that's Bondify.
All right. And we can put all of that, of course, in our show notes because we want our listeners to be able to connect with you and learn about the programs and the different things that you do. So just a couple more questions. One,
Sure.
yourself as, you're an adult adoptee, former foster youth. What advice would you give parents and caregivers today on, really how to connect with their kids? I mean, I think we've touched on a lot of what you're talking about here, but if you had to give like a one line of advice to parents.
I think the main thing is slowing down.
Yeah.
Slowing down and slowing down doesn't mean getting less done. When I say slowing down, I'm saying slow down your thinking. Everything's gonna be okay. Everything's gonna be you're worried about when your child's 18, or you're worried about what happened yesterday. And when you're in when you're obsessing about your future and you're reacting from the past, you're not in the present. But healing only happens in the present. So slow down, get emotionally present for your child, make eye contact, smile, hug them, spend time with them, talk to them, listen to them, and then realize that in any given situation, we always have two choices. We can continue to react from our stress and our fear and our overwhelm and be afraid of the future. That's always an option. Or we can stop, we can slow down, we can take 3 to 10 deep breaths, and we can choose love. And I really just encourage parents, when times get really tough, just slow down and breathe, realize everything's going to be okay, and choose love, and act according to what love would do. And I know that that doesn't seem very psychological or mental healthy, but let me tell you, that is psychology and that is mental health, because love is the most powerful healing force that exists.
Yeah, I love that. So, I always ask for a word of encouragement for our listeners. You kind of just gave us some of that, but what about hope for parents who are really struggling with their kids and they're feeling like they're just not going to make it? Any words of encouragement for them?
Oh my goodness. There are so many great people in this world, the sages, the wise leaders who have all come from tough places. Tough places and tough experiences, they create exceptional people. It doesn't mean that your child's going to end up in jail or something terrible. In fact, just the other day, I heard someone talking about that they had interviewed 40 billionaires, and all of those billionaires were considered neurodivergent. They were
Yeah.
they were not neurotypical. They were neurodivergent. And all of our children are trauma brain children. Those are all neurodivergent children. And you have to realize that trauma, it can be so challenging, but it is not the end of the story. Your child is just working through pain, and you may be working through your own pain, but let me tell you, you are good enough. You are good enough. Just trust that, because the only thing that keeps you from trusting that is your own fear and your own overwhelm. And just the fact that you're listening to Sandra's podcast and listening to this today tells me that you're good enough, because you are trying to learn more and do more and be more. But understand that you are okay right where you're at. Just calm that stress and calm that fear down, and show up with as much love and as much power as you can, and have faith. Have faith and persevere, and everything's going to be okay.
Love that. Thank you so much, Bryan. I appreciate all that you're doing on behalf of the adoption and foster care community worldwide, because I know you travel and speak internationally. Thank you so much for taking the time out today to be with us.
Sandra, thank you so much. And thank you for everything that you're doing as well. I so appreciate it. So
Thank
grateful.
Wow, what a great conversation with Bryan Post. I hope you will check out his website, feartolove.com. Just so grateful for all he shared today, and grateful for you to continue to be with us week after week, because we'd love to encourage and equip you on your adoption and foster parenting journey. Of course, we've got some great resources for you on our website. You heard the commercial about our Hope for the FASD Journey support community. Let me tell you, if you are parenting a kiddo who was prenatally exposed to alcohol, or maybe you don't know about alcohol, but you know there was drugs, most likely there was alcohol too. Whether you've got a diagnosis or not, this group, it's faith-based. We pray for one another, encourage one another, have a video devotional every week just specifically for you. You will want to check out our support group. So I hope that you will do that, as well as all of our online and in-person FASD workshops and training. I know every month we offer a free intro to FASD. It is not a recording, it is live. You will get me live, you'll be able to ask questions. And I also offer a 3-hour little bit of a deeper dive into FASD every month as well. And we vary the days that we offer it on and the time slots, always trying to make it available for everybody to have an option to that works for their schedule. And then also coming up at the end of October, we will begin our first of 5 weekly sessions. It's 15 hours worth of content on going deep with FASD using the neurobehavioral approach that I teach as a certified facilitator of the Facets neurobehavioral model. So definitely some wonderful opportunities that you can grab and take advantage of online. And of course, I travel and speak if you're looking to bring me into, for a group or a conference. If you just want to organize something specific for your church full of adoptive and foster parents, because I know coming in the beginning of the new year, I will be in Birmingham, Alabama, leading a day of training on FASD for the parents there. So always love to connect with you that way. So I hope that you will do that. Everything is found on our newly updated website, justicefororphansny.org. You would just click on the big circle that says Adoption and Foster Care Journey, and you'll find all of the things, as well as my blog, where I blog monthly, and you can sign up for my newsletter and all of that good stuff. So again, please make sure to subscribe and follow this podcast, leave a review, find us on our social media. I always love to connect with you. And I am, again, so grateful that you spent your valuable time with me today. Grateful to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans. And check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.